You ready?
Better Call Saul's been done and dusted for a few months now, and looking back, I think we can all agree that the show was one of the best of all time. And while many have praised the series for getting better with each season, with the lawyer and cartel plotlines eventually merging into one explosive plot with major twists and deaths around every corner, I think we should also be looking back at the show's early days to appreciate how even in the first season, the show was pushing boundaries and subverting expectations. While watching the first few episodes, viewers may think they have the show's formula figured out. The mix of some light drama and quirky characters seem to be setting up the series as a fun time that won't ever reach the seriousness of its predecessor, but still be enjoyable in its own right. And then you reach the 5th episode and everything changes. Before we can say a single thing about the episode itself, we need to talk about titles. Season 1's episode titles all follow the same naming convention of ending in the letter O. Uno, Mijo, Nacho, Hero. But then a wrench is thrown into the mix. Instead of the next episode being called something like, say, Jello, it's something completely different. Alpine Shepherd Boy. This clearly sets up the subversion of expectations that comes with this episode, turning the entire formula on its head. Alpine Shepherd Boy on the surface may seem like a standard episode of Better Call Saul. There are no exciting action sequences, no crazy death scenes, and yet the episode still contains some of the most defining moments of the entire series. You may think what I'm saying is ridiculous, but that's because the episode's writer, Bradley Paul, managed to hide all the deep themes and details behind the facade of a normal episode. Curiously, this is the only episode of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul written by Paul, which could hint at the rest of the writer's room being unaware of his plans to shake up the show, and firing him promptly after discovering the truth, but it was too late. The episode starts with a follow-up to Chuck's newspaper heist at the end of the previous episode, with the cops rocking up to question him. Of course, Chuck isn't exactly eager to let them in since opening the door would expose him to all the electricity outside, and he does a pretty bad job in his attempt to not come across as a crazy person. He tries to argue that he bought the newspaper instead of stealing it because he left money there.
I've left $5. The cover price is 50 cents.
Did your neighbor consent to sell you her paper?
Which you would think someone like Chuck would know that excuse is complete bullshit. Like if I broke into your house and stole your PS5 and left $500 there to cover the cost, would you be fine with it? I don't think so. Anyways, the cops break in and Chuck gets fucked, which is always satisfying to watch. After the cold open, we begin the episode proper, which involves Jimmy McGill visiting 3 potential clients after the success of his billboard stunt in the prior episode. This is where Paul's genius writing comes into play, since each client actually foreshadows crucial events in Jimmy's future. The first one is Big Ricky Sipes, who wants to enlist Jimmy in his plan to secede from the United States, and is willing to pay him $1 million up front. Unfortunately, Jimmy's excitement at this offer is crushed when it's revealed that the currency isn't really very useful, prompting him to leave in a hasty manner. Richard Sipes could, in a way, be foreshadowing Jimmy's enormous wealth later in his career as Saul Goodman, with his extravagant house and money served on a literal platter. Ricky's plan to withdraw from the country could also parallel Saul's constant wanting to get out from under the clutches of Walt's meth empire, but with Walt keeping him under his thumb until the very end. Jimmy's next client is Roland Jaycox, who reveals the breakout character of the episode, Tony the Toilet Buddy. At first glance, this coquettish commode seems to just be an amusing one-off joke, with Roland being completely oblivious to the privvy's subtle innuendos.
It's a little sexual, maybe?
Sexual? What is that?
Suggestive, maybe? Maybe that's a better word.
But this wouldn't be the last time a toilet was prominently featured in relation to Jimmy, with it reappearing in the 4th episode of Season 6, where it can be seen in the middle of Saul's new office, as well as a golden variant in Saul's mansion. For all we know, this lavish lavatory could be an upgraded model of a sex toilet, with Roland hitting it big with his invention and starting a whole line of toilet buddies. The big question though is what the toilet represents. It could be Saul flushing his life down the drain with his decisions throughout the show, or it could be a reference to the fact that Saul does massive shits into sunroofs. In addition to this genius metaphor, this is easily the funniest scene in not just this show, but perhaps all of television.
Look, I'm not saying this thing won't make you rich. I mean, some of your wealthier Pacific Rim nations, they'll love this, the crazy bastards.
I created this for children. Children, understand?
Well, hey, Viagra was originally invented to treat hypertension. Well, look how that turned out.
After getting kicked out by Roland for suggesting that the toilet would be better suited for sex perverts, Jimmy visits his third and final client, Geraldine Strauss, who introduces us to the titular Alpine Shepherd Boy himself. This scene sets up Jimmy's future foray into elder law, which has big impacts on his arc throughout the show. It also sets up the Hummel heist in season 4, which leads to Saul's connection with Ira, an important player in Walt's meth empire. Geraldine would also go on to star in Jimmy's Davis and Maine commercial next season, so this is all laying important groundwork for the future.
This one is the Alpine Shepherd Boy. It's for her nephew, so come.
Jimmy finally gets paid for his hard work, ending this mini trilogy of clients. After this, we see Jimmy and Kim having a fun time together until it's rudely interrupted by Howard, who tells Jimmy about Chuck's misadventures. This leads to easily the most important scene in not just this episode, but potentially the whole season. We've gotten a couple hints that there's more to Chuck's electromagnetic hypersensitivity than meets the eye, and here we get confirmation of that, when Dr. Cruz sneakily turns on his hospital bed without him noticing at all. This is a pretty major plot development, and Cruz also drops some pretty major foreshadowing on Chuck's eventual fate that may or may not have been intentional.
Coleman lanterns indoors, a camp stove. He could burn his house down, or the entire neighborhood, and then you're looking at a commitment of 10 to 20 years.
When Howard arrives to be a nuisance, Jimmy acts like he's going to commit Chuck for psychiatric evaluation, but doesn't end up doing it, despite Lara insisting that it would help Chuck more than just continuing to enable him. This conflict of whether to commit Chuck would eventually re-emerge at the end of season 2. After Jimmy takes Chuck home, they go through their usual rigmarole of Chuck thinking Slip and Jimmy is back, until Jimmy convinces him that the billboard stunt was a one-time thing, and Chuck suddenly doesn't need the space blanket anymore. This is just more confirmation that Chuck's EHS is directly linked to Jimmy, which is further proven a few episodes later, when Chuck is able to go outside with no issues at all, since he's entirely focused on other things. After that, we get to see Jimmy doing what he does best, charming elderly people to get their business, complete with his Andy Griffith suit. I do sometimes wonder if Jimmy ever really cared about old people and their problems, or if he just specialized in elder law because he was good at it. He even tries to impress Mike with his new practice, but he doesn't seem amused. This retirement home that Jimmy does his business in is the same one that Hector would end up in during Breaking Bad. The episode ends with Mike being shady as usual, and we see Stacy for the first time, setting up the 5-0 adventure next episode. So that's a rundown of the episode point by point, and you can see that Bradley was able to sneak in lots of hints on the future of several key characters, as well as establish some big themes that would permeate throughout the rest of the show. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the show's trajectory before and after this episode is completely different. The first 4 episodes are mostly comedic, with some light drama thrown in for the cinephiles, while the very next episode after Alpine Shepherd Boy is the devastating exploration of Mike's past, 5-0. And then after that, both Jimmy and Mike's storylines really get going, with Jimmy's morals being tested and earth-shattering reveals turning his life on its head. This episode was the defining moment where the show's identity was permanently changed, and we have the genius Bradley Paul to thank for that. Let's hope he can make his grand return for whatever spin-off of Breaking Bad universe does next. Maybe a show about Roland J. Cox and his rise to power. Whatever ends up happening, hopefully you come away from this video with a new appreciation for Alpine Shepherd Boy. And if you made it this far, you should go to its IMDb page and rate it a 10 out of 10, because it absolutely does not deserve to be the lowest rated episode in the series. Thanks for watching.